Well, good morning. It's great to be with you again. I was in Columbus, Ohio last week. It was a fun time. The air quality was horrible. Well, I decided I was back in Southern California, having chew your air before you inhale it. So it was, that part was a little rough. I'm glad to be back in Nashville, and certainly be glad to be back with you. Glad to have the Wasikis. How nice. Wasikis, goodness gracious. Ben, see, you go away, I'm going to forget your name. That's it. But so nice to have them back. A few weeks ago, I was asked to speak on this subject on a Wednesday night down in one of the churches in Athens, Alabama. And I really enjoyed working on this and studying this, and when I was done, I thought, boy, you needed that. So if I needed it, then I figured you needed it too. So that's what we're going to talk about this morning, contentment versus discontentment. First and foremost, I would like to emphasize how important this particular subject is. The idea of being content in the condition that we are in, being content in whatever God gives us in this life, is not just a decision we're making in order to feel better, a decision that it's a better way of living. We know it is. Nobody likes to be discontent. But on the other hand, we need to understand that this is much deeper than that. It is sinful to be a Christian and to not be content. I want to make that very, very clear as we go through this lesson. That's going to be hitting us square in the face. It is sinful for us to not be content with what God has given us as Christians, because it is a lack of trusting God to provide for us and give us the life that He desires to give us. And discontentment is saying, I'm not getting what I want. And so we have to be very, very careful of that. Furthermore, that when we see the necessity of this, it reminds us of what Paul says in Colossians 3 verse 5, when he says, put to death that which is earthly in you, lists some sins, and the last one he lists is covetousness. He said, which is idolatry. Placing other things and desiring other things that we either cannot have or should not have, and using that to spend our money on or not be able to have the time that we ought to have for God, or to not live a peaceful life, mentally peaceful life, is idolatry. It is allowing what is earthly, as Paul says in Colossians 3, what is earthly then to continue to rise up and be a part of us. Jesus talked about this more when he talked about the thorny ground in the parable of the sower, when he points out that the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches and the desires for other things enter in and choke the word and make it proves it unfruitful. So there are all these matters that bring about a lack of contentment. And Jeremiah goes along with what Jesus said here with thorny ground quite well. In Jeremiah chapter 2 and verse 12 and 13, notice his words. Be appalled, O heavens. Be shocked, and at this, and be shocked, be utterly dumbfounded, declares the Lord. For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and have hewed out cisterns for themselves, broken cisterns that can hold no water. When we do not live a life of contentment in the Lord, it is easily a matter of we are trying to get water from broken cisterns, from that which is not going to satisfy and that which is not going to care for us. And that is exactly what God has said to Israel over and over again throughout the ages, and said to us as well when Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount and emphasized some of these same principles. I thought about, as I was studying this, that I could probably preach on contentment in just about any book of the Bible. Because everything is about trust. Everything is about what God wants us to be in His sight and to be satisfied with Him. What a thought, to be satisfied just with God as our ultimate joy and our ultimate contentment. So let's talk a little bit about first just the causes of discontentment. And we have already seen just in the reading that was done this morning in chapter 2 of Ecclesiastes, the desires that Solomon had. This originates from Ecclesiastes 1. He lays this out in verse 13, and he says, I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. Again, in chapter 2 and verse 3, he says, I search with my heart to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, how to lay hold on folly till I might see what is good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. So when you consider what Solomon is doing here, and I have read this and reread this and studied it for so many years, and it really hit me strongly this morning as I was going over it a final time. Solomon is doing what the world does. He is seeking to change things into a utopian world. You see it in the previous verses in verse 14 and 15 of chapter 1, right after he said, this is an unhappy business that God has placed before us. Why is it an unhappy business God has given us to do? He says in verse 14, I've seen everything that's done under the sun. Behold, all is vanity and striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. This is what the political progressives in our society are trying to do. If you wonder why they're doing what they're doing, it is because they don't believe in God and they're trying to turn this into a utopian world. That's what's happening. And that's what happens in our own lives. When we go about trying to strive to turn our lives into a utopian life and expecting something out of this earthy life that is utopian, and God never intended it. This is not what this is about, and that's what frustrates Solomon. And so when you see him going about all this work and everything in chapter 2, what is he doing? Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. He's attempting to create his own personal utopian world. Why, he would be so, and I'm sure was then, so exalted today for all that he had done. It would be the Biltmore plus, you know. We would go to see all that he had done, and he would be dead. When we went and saw the Biltmore, I guess this was last year or so, it made a pretty good day of it. And it was the same thing when we were in Florida and saw one of, I forget the guy's name down there. But anyway, he had built some crazy thing. And they're all dead. And everybody else is seeing it, enjoying it. I thought, how sad. How sad that you created all this. It's beautiful, it's fantastic, but you died. Not even in an old age. You died fairly young. I can say that. If it was under me, it was young. You died. You did not get out of it that you thought you could get. Look what he says. He says, after he did all of that, behold, all was vanity and striving after the wind. And then in verse 17 of chapter 2, he even said, so I hated life because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and striving after the wind. Can you imagine? Here is a man who has done all of this. He has anything he wants, everything his eyes looked at, he desired. He said, got it. I can do any of this. He took all of it. Would anybody imagine, okay, you're going on TV, we're going to interview you and to tell us all about what it's like to be you. And he goes, I hate it. It has been an absolute misery. My life stinks. I'm like, Solomon, how in the world were you able to do everything that everybody imagines and wants to do and create this world around you that just seems fantastic, and you turned around and when it's all done you said it was a big waste of time. The only thing I got out of it was fun doing it. And when it was at the end, I didn't get the utopian world that I was looking for. And I hate this. I hate this life. Not only that, I made all of this. I worked, and I'm going to give it to a son who's probably going to be a goofball. Paraphrase. And he was. Pretty tough to see that, and we need to ask the question, why? Why is it, after all he accomplished, how could he possibly hate life? Here's the key. Expectations. He had expectations that he would be able to create something in this earthly realm that was going to give him the world that he desired. And it is exactly the root cause of discontentment, is expectations. Let's talk. Let's give a little excuse me. I'm still got the smog of Columbus in me, I can tell you that. In Job chapter 3, take a look at what Job says after the trial has hit him hard. Job chapter 3, listen to the words. Job said, "Let the day perish in which I was born, on the night that said a man is conceived. Let that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor light shine upon it. Let gloom and deep darkness claim it. Let clouds dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. Let that thick darkness seize it. Let it not rejoice among the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of months. Behold, let that night be barren. Let no joyful cry enter it. Let those curse it who curse the day, who are ready to rouse up Leviathan. Let the stars of its dawn be dark. Let it hope for light but have none, nor see the eyelids of the morning, because it did not shut the doors of my mother's womb and hide my trouble from my eyes. Why did I not die at birth, come out from the womb and expire? Why did the knees receive me, or why the breast that I should nurse? For then I would have lain down and been quiet, and I would slept, and then I would have been at rest." How's Job's level of contentment? Wow. He says, let's just take that day and remove it from the year that I was born. Something else. Now contrast that with the Apostle Paul in the book of Philippians. He's been in prison for 4 years for something he did not do. He's in chains all this time. He refers to his chains. And he can't stop talking about joy and rejoicing, and admonishes everyone to rejoice in the Lord. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, he actually says this, "I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities, for when I am weak, then I'm strong." God is determined that I will go through this, and I am content with it. Not only am I content with it, Philippians says, I am full of joy, with 19 times using the word joy and rejoicing in that very short letter to emphasize his joy during that. What a contrast between these two. We need to take a careful look at that and give ourselves a quick test for discontentment and disappointment. Number one, Do you have expectations for your life? Let's see. Now, really planned on retiring at 59. I don't want to wait till I'm 70. I'm planning on having good. How long are you going to live, by the way? What's the year of your death? My mom died at 92. That sounds like a pretty good year. I'll go for 92. Teresa might want to go earlier if things don't go well in the meantime. But what's the expectations? We have them. It is inserted in our DNA to expect to have things that somebody else doesn't have. Oh yes, we look around and see people in tragedy and we go, oh boy, fortunately it's not me. And in those very words, we're thinking, surely it won't be me. I've got these other plans. I know how this is going to work. Do you get angry and frustrated when life does not fulfill your expectations? Things didn't work the way you thought they were going to work. Do you believe that if you do all things right, you'll be rewarded? And do you believe crooked things ought to be fixed so that you can live the life you want to live? All of these things are messages to us that we are trying to live under the sun and striving for the wind. And by the way, here's another way to look at striving for the wind and living a life in which you're trying to create your own personal utopian world. It's the dumbest thing you could ever do, and it's the dumbest thing you could ever live. As dumb as trying to chase down the wind and catch it. We read over striving after the wind. All is vanity. And we just kind of go, yeah, personalize that. We need to personalize that. We're just doing the dumbest thing we could ever do. So how do we defeat it? How can we defeat this discontentment? Well, first notice a contrast. You noticed in the reading that we had this morning in 2:1 through 11 there, you notice the Solomon's use of the personal pronoun I. It was I. All the way through. I'm going to do this. I did this and I did that. And he's all about himself, and he's going to, by his personal position in life and his wealth and his strength and his talents, he's going to produce the world that makes him full of joy forevermore. That's what he's looking for. And after he says, I hated life, in chapter 2 and verse 24, he finally backs off, and our writer says, our preacher says, there is nothing better for a person that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his labor. This also I saw is from the hand of God, for apart from him, who can eat and who can have enjoyment? For to one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner he has given the business of gathering and collecting only to give to the one who pleases God. This also is vanity and striving after wind. Notice the carefulness here. First off, he says, now contrast to what Solomon did, he says, apart from God, no one can eat and no one can have enjoyment. You're not going to have the world you think you're going to have apart from God. God is the only source of this. In fact, he goes on to say, God gives to the person who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, joy. God is the one who gives it. You can't go get it. That's what Solomon tried. You can't go get it. And it is out of the range of earthly existence to go get it. Oh, that's significant. Apart from him, you cannot have it. It will not happen. I always crack up. People Say, well, I don't have much time for the Lord because I've got all of this and I've got all of that and I've got this big business and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. Please, just keep right on doing it, because verse 26 says you'll feed the rest of us for where God wants to give His joy and pleasure. But how foolish for you. Notice, wisdom, knowledge, joy are not attained by one's own ingenuity and strength or goodness. It's attained by a gift from God. So there is that contrast with that. Look at this. Jesus said the same thing. Matthew chapter 16, verse 24, Jesus told His disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Emphasis on the word life there. Who's going to get life? Not the one who tries to save it, but the one who loses his life for Jesus' sake. You're not going to get life. You're not going to get it in your job. You're not going to get it in your pleasures. You're not going to get it in your recreation. You're not going to get it in the home you live in or get it in the fancy car you drive. It is not going to be found there, as much as your brain keeps saying that somehow if I have it, it will. No, it won't. You will attain it when you deny yourself and you take up your cross. And your life is pursuing and following Him. And not in a casual way, not in a now and then way, not in a way in which when I get a chance I will, and when I separate some time I will. I'll put God on my to-do list. He is the to-do list. And everything, whether job or what we have, is pursued through Him or given as a gift because of Him. But we pursue Him. And if you go to try to save your life, you will lose it. And God's doing an amen right now. It's so incredibly important to get in our heads, and we cannot do it. Just to prove this point, most of you know in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, you see those contrast in life. We won't read them. You can spot them, look at them. Is a time to born, time to die, all of these things. Those are the things that make us discontent. We want those controlled. We don't want the negative sides. We want to control those things. And verse 9 actually ends it by saying, what gain is the work of women's toil? What gain is there to try to manipulate these things in life? They will happen. And you can cry about it and scream about it and have a fit about it and wish there was a better president, but it's still going to happen. And by the way, it will happen no matter who's elected. It will happen. It's just the way it is. It's so important to realize this. Now look what he says again. Because you can't manipulate those things, I perceive there's nothing better for them to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. So also that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in his toil. This is God's gift to man. And I perceive whatever God does endures forever. In other words, He's done this. This is the way it's going to be. You're not going to change it. Nothing can be added to it. Nothing or anything taken from it. God has done it so that people fear before Him. Notice the conclusion. Why has He done it? So people will turn their eyes to Him. You can't control it. It's to God you have to be. That's where you have to put your hope. That's where you have to see Him. You don't know what's going to happen? Oh, but I got all these plans. I got all these expectations. He said, I don't care what your plans and expectations are. You cannot control those things. You cannot make them happen. And therefore, verse 22, God has done this to bring us to see that we don't know what's going to happen after us, and we must trust Him. That's our only hope, to have that actually take place. Now, let's bring this a little bit more home here, just a second. Job 38. I want you to see this. Job chapter 38. Notice what God says to Job. Talk about a message of being content. Job 38, God speaks out of a whirlwind to Job. Just imagine God's voice. We just heard a good thunder from him. Let's imagine God's voice. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now remember, he is talking to a person who has spent months, maybe a year, who knows how long, in absolute misery, but also pointing his finger at God. You never give up on God. My favorite is, Lord, if you just come down, we have a conversation, you'd realize your errors here. And God's going to sit back and stroke his long white beard and go, wow, thanks, Job. You brought that to my attention. I never would have thought of that. So sorry. We'll get that corrected right away. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you make it known to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurement? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? Or what were its bases? Or on what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who shut the sea up with doors when it burst out of the womb? Who, when I made clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band, and prescribed limits for it, and set bars and doors, and said, thus far shall you come, and no farther, and there shall be your proud waves stayed. Have you commanded the morning since your days began, caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the skirts of the earth, and the wicked be shaken out of it? You notice the sense of this? I imagine, of course, at the end of this, Job just is quaking. He says, I'm shutting my mouth. Go on to chapter 40 of Job. Look at verses 1 and 2. God continues. She says, the Lord said to Job, shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? He who argues with God, let him answer it. Complaining? Discontent? Fed up with the crooked things? Want to make a utopian life out of yourself? Shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? Let's hear you answer it. And then in verse 6, Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, dress for action like a man. Gird up your loins, in other words. I will question you and you make it known to me. Will you even put me in the wrong? Will you condemn me that you may be in the right? Have you an arm like God? Can you thunder with a voice like his? Adorn yourself with majesty and dignity. Clothe yourself with glory and splendor. Pour out the overflowings of your anger and look on everyone who is proud and abase him. Look on everyone who is proud and bring him low, and tread down the wicked where they stand. Hide them all in the dust together. Bind their faces in the world below. Then will I acknowledge you, that your own right hand can save you. Oh, we need to repeatedly read all of God's words to Job here and what he says. Trust in God of however he wants to treat my life is what has to happen. If God doesn't want me to have something and never gives me something, or if God brings me through horrible trials or whatever it is, that's perfectly okay. That's the way it should be. He bought us, and our greatest joy, and I can tell you by experience, you will only learn it not by me telling it to you, but by you going through a type of trial that brings you so low that you realize you cannot do anything but turn to God. And at that moment, you'll find your greatest joy, because you have finally given up everything. This is not your life. He bought you with the precious blood of the Lamb. And everything He made you for and created you for is for His glory and His honor. Not just to provide everything we want. That is how we get to contentment. When Paul said in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 4, rejoice in the Lord, and again I say rejoice, please let me remind you, he is not saying, you're in the Lord, you can be happy. No, your rejoicing is in the Lord. That is a conclusion from Philippians chapter 3 of what we have in the Lord. Rejoice. Look what He's done. Look how He's released you. Look how He's brought you out of bondage. Look how He opened the prison doors, Isaiah 49, and let the prisoners go free, and you're free. Rejoice in the Lord and what He has planned for you and all the world that He is creating for you. Rejoice in the Lord. That is the picture. So finally, trust is what will bring us to contentment and the knowledge of God. Trust requires that we know God and pursue Him. That is exactly what Paul said in Philippians 3. I want to know Him and I want to have fellowship in His sufferings. Wow. And that is why He lived in joy. But let's see what that requires. Remember what Jesus said in the parable of the sower? By the way, one of the most important things you and I can do in reading the parables of that day, and especially the parable of the sower, the wayside ground was not the outside unbeliever. It was not talking about the atheist. The wayside ground, He was speaking to thousands of believers. Thousands of believers. And He said, some of you are wayside ground. You let the word just pop right out of your brain after it's been done, and you don't do anything with it. And the thorny ground was some of those believers who didn't get roots deep enough to grow and be able to produce fruit. And thorny ground was those believers who allowed the cares of this world, the deceitfulness of riches, and the desires for other things. I like that. I was noticing that this morning. The desires for other things enter in and choke the word. Now note what it does. It chokes the word so that it becomes unfruitful. How is the word choked? What brings me to maturity? 2 Timothy 3, verse 16 and 17. All Scripture, most of you could quote it, ... brings us to maturity. So when you think of that, where is your level of knowledge? I know this is a little repetitive for you. But still, have you applied it? Could you have a conversation with somebody about Isaiah? Could you have a conversation with somebody about Chronicles? Could you have a conversation with somebody about 1 and 2 Samuel? Could you have a conversation with somebody about 2 Corinthians? Where are the holes in your knowledge of God? You see, it's that knowledge and it's that pursuit of God that brings you to His presence. And in His presence, the psalmist said, there is fullness of joy and pleasures forevermore. all that you have ever desired, everything that's in your heart that you want to be filled, is found in those beautiful cisterns that God has the flowing of living water. But we failed that. Pursuit of God is time-consuming. And we live in a world in which we have scheduled every moment of our time. But it requires putting away pursuits that in any way compete with God. Even more dangerous. Because of our lifestyle, are we raising our children to see life as something that is to be fun and recreation and possessions? And that will be the worst, because they will chase it faster than we ever thought of. So, final question. If you had enough to eat and drink and a place to live, but didn't have the money to do anything else, would you have enough time to pursue God? And would you be content? Listen to the words that Paul uttered in 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 6. If I can get out of 2 Timothy, I'll read it to you. 1 Timothy 6 and verse 6. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we shall be content. Took a 2x4 to my head. What about yours? These are things we've all read. These things all gone over. And we think that our trials are nothing compared to what we see Christians in other part of the world with persecution and have to deal with. True in many ways. But the trial of the possessions and the country that we live in may be the destruction of our soul if we're not careful. We need to make a good self-evaluation of that. Obviously, if we help you in any way, we would be glad to. We're going to sing a song right now. We urge you to think about your condition. Be glad to help you. You can step forward, talk to us afterward, whatever it would be. Please take this opportunity while together we stand while we sing.